Thank you very much, Elmore. And to Gary Brown, who thank you for those kind words about my former utility. I think that the weather issues are certainly going to be much more of a problem going forward. And whatever we need to do, we do need to harden the utility systems. So whatever means we do it, partly through renewables, partly through distributed generation, 30+ years in the utility industry, people do expect a very highly reliable electric and natural gas system, period. It's up to all of us to figure out how to do that so that they're not inconvenienced. This morning's sessions were outstanding. I learned so much in listening to Ed Cox and Colin Davies and Carter Page. Excellent presentations, and the focus this morning is really on the global energy supply, the supply and the demand, and there are just lots of data up there, a lot of facts, a lot of information, allowed us to understand how global our energy supply actually is and how interrelated all the different political perspectives are and non-political perspective, how the financial aspects tie into that. I think it provides us a really good background to understand just how energy, how, number one, important it is to our global economy, and number two, all the challenges that you have to go through to bring energy as a resource from the ground or from the air or wherever you get it from into the mainstream, whether it's natural gas or oil or coal. They all have their pluses, they all have their minuses. Renewable energy is no different. When we're talking about solar or wind or biomass, tremendous challenges to be addressed there, not the least of which is technology and the challenge of the financial challenge. Down to earth is the cost. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. This afternoon we have three excellent panelists. We're going to talk a little bit about the actual how do we fit renewable energy, we're going to focus on renewable energy, fit that into our marketplace. You understand what all the issues are, so the challenges that we talked about this morning. But given all that, how do we actually bring more renewable energy to the table? How do we make it competitive and cost effective? How do we market it? I mean, how is this going to happen? There are several different perspectives on this, which we're going to share with you this afternoon. And we have three panelists who are going to speak on that subject this afternoon. The first is Richard Dewey, who's the Senior Vice President of the New York Independent System Operator at the New York ISO. Richard brings a wealth of industry and system operations experience to the table. And he's going to discuss the capability of the ISO marketplace to provide a competitive supply product and things that would need to change to make the market for renewable energy more competitive at the retail level. And you've heard this morning that, we talk about distributed generation and the impact on the utility grid. Richard's going to give us some insights into that. So without further ado, I will ask Richard to come forward. And I guess it's going to come up here. I don't see it. Yeah, you need slides. Okay, so you got to be up here. Okay. Sure.
Thank you, India. I'm going to talk a little bit about, start this panel discussion. I'm going to focus on the bulk power, the wholesale electric markets, if you will. You got to understand the construct of how that set of processes works before we dig down into retail or the lower levels. I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the basic formation of the New York ISO. I'm going to focus on renewables and how renewables fit into our markets and some of the things that we see at the wholesale level for renewables. And then some of the specific challenges. I'm also going to focus this on just a New York only perspective because that's, I think, we'll focus a little bit in terms of some of the data we heard this morning about what's happening nationally with fuels and I think it'd be more appropriate for what we're trying to do. The New York ISO, we've got multiple sets of missions. First and foremost, the top being reliability, and everything we do hinges around maintaining a reliable power network. Gary talked about the importance of that. We view that not only as a societal import, but also really from the standpoint of how our economy hinges on that. You look at billions of dollars a day of lost revenue when New York City doesn't have power, and that's a pretty serious endeavor when you start talking about keeping the lights on. From administering the wholesale markets, we try to do this in the most open and independent way as we can. We don't take any position on whether prices should be high or prices should be low. What we focus on is that the prices should be right and that they should be locationally correct, so the right price signal gets set, so investment gets made at the appropriate point on the power grid so it can do the most good. From a planning standpoint, we're very involved in participating and informing both the different stakeholders that participate in our market as well as government. We participate in some providing data and some of the studies for some of the ongoing initiatives we talked about, Indian Point being one, but certainly other aspects of planning for the future of the power grid. And then from a technology standpoint, this is something Gary talked a little bit about. Some of the new monitoring tools we're putting in place to maintain reliability. One of the things we learned coming out of 2003 was we only knew about it in New York for a few seconds before we lost connection to the rest of the world and our backbone went down. But when some of the planning engineers out in Ohio started going through some of the phaser measurement units that were installed in those substations to do data collection, the data showed almost an hour's worth of clear signals that the power system was in deep trouble. The trouble is they weren't connected to anything and nobody was really looking at those. So one of the things that we've learned, and the Department of Energy through the Smart Grid Investment Grant has been making big inroads on the whole Eastern Interconnect to beef up that infrastructure of phaser measurement units, connect them in a real-time way, and also set up an information sharing network so that we can share our data with Midwest ISO, with PJM, ISO New England, really up and down the whole Eastern Interconnect, with an idea that those kind of regional surprises won't affect us in the same way again. So it's taken us a long time to get there, but that's certainly something that we're focusing on from a reliability standpoint. Talk a little bit about our markets. So the New York ISO wholesale markets constitute about 50% of the energy that's used in New York State. The actual amount that's generated, about half of that is transacted through bilateral contracts with between the generators and loads. The other 50% comes through the New York ISO's markets themselves. Of that 50%, about 45% is transacted on a day-ahead basis from hourly schedules, and the remaining 5% is chewed up in real time on 5-minute schedules. When you look at the energy markets, it's really multiple components between energy reserves and regulation. It's a fairly sophisticated co-optimization model where we look at the forecast, the projected demand, the bids and the offers that are in the system, and then we come up with the least production cost schedule to reliably meet that consumer demand. We're indifferent in terms of how the models operate today to where that energy comes from, in terms of whether it's renewables, coal, or nuclear. We look at it purely on an economic cost basis, and that's administered through tariffs that are approved by our stakeholders, but ultimately are filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that's the construct of how the markets work and how the rules for the markets are changed and adjusted. Some of the questions are, well, what if we wanted to change that? And I'll get a little bit into our shared governance process. Certainly, there's a lot of opportunity, and we are under continuous evolution for market rule changes, where our stakeholders and the participants in our markets will come and propose a change or an adjustment to the rules, or even in many cases significant changes to the construct of our markets that takes its way through a stakeholder process and ultimately turns into rules. Looking at the generating capacity, this is some data. We talked a little bit about the national scene. This is a New York specific view right now. This is the generating capacity, and as Gary indicated, the system is built to handle the highest forecasted load on the hottest summer day with reserve requirement in place in case one of those units fails. So this is a measure of what capacity is out there to serve the load. You can see that in contrast to the rest of the nation, we're a little bit higher on nuclear percentage, a little bit higher, a lot higher on hydro, in fact. One of the interesting things, we talked a little bit about fuel diversity this morning. One of the interesting aspects of the New York generation mix is you'll see that large green slice of the pie there is dual fuel. And for various reliability reasons, many of the units within New York are capable of burning both gas and oil. That's for reliability purposes, to insulate the units against the potential loss of gas supply. So we talked about how the gas pipeline network we're very frequently at the end of a long chain, and on those peak load days, we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we can't get gas. So the design of the reliability rules are such that a number of the units have the capability to burn oil and can switch very quickly in the event of loss of gas. So the system itself is kind of designed a little bit of reliability into it based on some of the local rules for New York State. And then you can see that that's fossil fuels in terms of the percentage, 70%. Now when you start looking at actual generation, so this is again recognizing that at any given point, on average, we only have about half of the capacity actually working, and this is the amount of in fact generation, and the source of this being this is 2011 as posted in our 2012 Cold Book, and you can see that hydro and nuclear being very frequently the most cost-effective fuel, given the load demand, actually serves up more of the actual capacity to meet the demand, and then some of the other fuels, specifically oil, goes down to almost nothing unless it's a peak load day. So that's a case where the fossil fuels, while being a significant piece of the overall generating capacity, don't in fact actually contribute as much to the overall needed load. When you start talking about how the open access process works, we do have tariffs. We operate under federal tariffs that grant access to the transmission system. Our shared governance process is a little bit unique. Many of the other regions or other market territories within the country don't have the same level of participation by its market participants or its members. Our shared governance process is a segmented distribution of our market participants, where loads for consumers, generators, end-use consumers, municipalities, and then public power each have a weighted slice of the overall influence in terms of voting new rules into existence and how our markets operate. So any market participant can bring a proposed rule change into the stakeholder process. It gets vetted through a series of meetings. Ultimately, it's voted and recommended to our board, and then typically then our board would file that with FERC. So a question of, what if we wanted to change the New York market rules to be more accommodating or differentiating to different fuel types? There is an avenue and a vehicle by which we could do that, but coming through and recognizing that the overall approach to the market is that lowest production cost to meet the stated load has been the overall design of the market. But certainly that avenue is there if there was an appetite amongst the stakeholders to want to do that a little bit differently. Looking at wind specifically, just showing you some charts. This is wind in New York. We've had as many as 8,000 plus megawatts in the interconnection queue at times. You can kind of see when the subsidies tapped out a little bit there, we kind of plateaued off. The number of megawatts in the interconnection queue has been sort of stagnant in the last few years. But nonetheless, there still is some active projects that are within the queue. So this is about 1,400 megawatts against a peak load of, or a peak generating capacity of about 40,000 megawatts, and then average use between 18 and 20,000 megawatts on a typical day. So while the capacity is tapped out, one of the things that's interesting is the actual generation level has continuously gone up. Some of this is because while we have the wind turbines on the grid and in the ground, they're very difficult to manage. They're very difficult from an economic standpoint to get them scheduled to their maximum capability. They're subject not only to the weather and to wind patterns and fluctuations in the wind, they're subject to changing conditions on the power grid. A lot of the wind in New York is bottled in the North Country, where it's very difficult to transmit the power out of the region where they exist. And it's also hard to predict and schedule the wind, given uncertainties about what's coming up for the day in terms of other types of generation that's in place. I'm going to go to the next slide and then I'm going to go back, because this talks a little bit about some of the things that we've done. The reason that chart is able to continue to go up, even though the actual capacity has sort of tapped out, is we've been continually introducing new market systems and rules in place to help maximize the amount of wind that we can utilize on the system. These are some technological advances and some rule changes that we put in place in New York that within the application of our existing tariffs allows us to more effectively utilize the wind generation that was in place. And whether that's going from a centralized wind forecasting system, which allows us to look at multiple different weather inputs and compare that against what the online capabilities and maintenance information we get from the wind plants. So we have the best possible picture of how much wind is available. So when we get to that point where we can use it, we can maximize the amount that we can put in. The other piece is in 2009, the wind is actually on economic dispatch. So the wind plant owners are obligated to provide economic data and bid offer energy into our system so that they get evaluated economically with all the other resources that are in the system. And then we've got the capability of backing them down if they're either not economic or if they have if we have an event or a reliability event that it's too dangerous to the system for them to continue to put that power onto the grid. The wind developers have been very, very collaborative with us because they recognize that by integrating some of these rules and tools into the base system, then they've got a greater opportunity to be scheduled and not curtailed by our operators because of reliability reasons. Energy storage, we've also taken some steps to put some rules into our market software to facilitate and enable energy storage. We recognize the capability or the promise of storage to be able to capture some of that generation that takes place with the wind off hours. And I'm going to pop back to that last slide. So here's a little bit of a profile. We talked somewhat about, and Gary mentioned it. You look at the green dotted line, that's the typical wind generation profile. Most of our wind is sitting up on the Tug Hill Plateau. Wind patterns coming off the Great Lakes. Typically the best wind generation opportunities are in the middle of the night. That's when it's the highest, and that's when our energy usage is in fact the lowest. This is a typical summer day where you get the doldrums of midday. So the air conditioners start popping on at about 10 in the morning, noon, 1 o'clock, and that's exactly when the wind dies out. So that's a profile that kind of gives you an understanding of how valuable energy storage and effective energy storage would be to help capture some of this energy and make it more useful on the system. The other piece of this, which you kind of have to consider, is the economics of it. The energy pricing that the wholesale markets anyway have is it's locational based and it's marginal by the hour. So energy prices are the lowest when you have the lowest load. So the wind is generating gangbusters where the energy is cheap, and then where they could be making tons of money is when it's not flowing. So, an opportunity to be able to capture some more of that not only would be advantageous from the amount of energy that we're allowed to use from the wind, but also the economics of that kind of invention. And then lastly, a little bit about solar. The rules that we have incorporated within our market are just as they're on the grid. There's a very large solar farm underway down in Long Island at Brookhaven National Labs, but it really hasn't, on a large-scale basis, made any inroads into New York yet. But the same rules that allow for some of the variable operation of wind are available in our wholesale markets for solar as well, so the same incentive there. One of the big things here, I try to talk about it. We talked a little bit about planning and policy. Transparency is absolutely vital to the overall success of markets. I think that one of the things we've learned and what we try to promote at the New York ISO is making available data for different market participants for understanding how the markets work, how the market results are consistent, what the planning studies actually show. Make sure every market participant has the same level of information, so if they're making a financial bet, that they're doing it with the best possible information. Everybody has the same information. That's one of the important factors that we're promoting as part of our operation as well. Okay, that's it. Do you want to take questions
No,
now?
please, yes. Any questions for Richard?
Yes, sir.
That was a great story you told about First Energy. Gives you a whole new perception of their name. Being able to do anything with the sleep and switch.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question.
And actually, I wasn't, the device that they had in place was really not designed at the time to be monitoring. It was designed for planning departments to go out after the fact and look at longer run data. So it's not a fault on their part that particular piece of data didn't get in place. It's recognition that the industry was never using those tools.
The question that I wanted to ask was sort of your role as a cop on the block. And that has to do with the system being gamed by entities like Keyspan and National Grid and others to the detriment of ratepayers in New York State. I'm wondering how that role fits solely on your agency's shoulders or cooperation with our friend PSC, and how we can do something for the citizens here to reduce the cost of energy. I know in Germany that the amount of renewable energy on the system has dropped the cost of power for everyone. How do we make this fair?
Well, in terms of, I'll address first in the instance of gaming, there are multiple people that are looking at the results on a regular and continual basis to make sure that the outcomes are fair and that any impropriety or irregularities are thoroughly investigated. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, has an Office of Enforcement that takes a very active role. They get copies of our market results every single day. They investigate and research anomalies continually. The way that our tariffs are set up, we have an outside entity, our market monitoring unit, which is independent from the New York ISO, that also looks over and analyzes the results on a daily basis, looking specifically for irregularities and gaming opportunities. When they're found, they're reported to the Office of Enforcement at FERC, and those, any kind of disciplinary actions are then pursued by the federal regulator.
It was actually cheap though. If you look at the fine for National Grid and the amount of money they profited on in terms of gaming the system, and I take those numbers any day. Do you have a more sophisticated system now because of, I don't know, Constellation getting blocked? Is there a better process in place right now?
Well, I think that I think there is. I think that I know the FERC is always looking to upgrade their tools. We're continually giving them more data and access to our market results. Our own tools that we have now built within the New York ISO, for example, enable us to simulate market conditions and rerun market outcomes by varying the inputs. So we've got the capability to do a what if, what if this person bid this versus that? What if this transaction was in there versus not in there? And we can rerun those results when requested by the regulator, and then we provide that data. We don't get involved in the enforcement of the discipline. We do have some very sophisticated systems where we look at market efficiencies on a daily basis to try to determine if the most efficient outcome was determined. And then if we find any irregularities with that, we typically bring it back through our stakeholder process. If we can identify a more efficient way to schedule energy. Now, that doesn't mean we think the prices should be higher or prices should be lower. We just look at the efficiency of it in that case. Alan?
A question, and it goes back to this question I've been asking for the last couple of years. A pilot program where you can actually have a generator somewhere, that's a renewable generator, a wind turbine, a solar array, and have it so that you're actually marketing, tracking, selling individual discrete units of energy to an end user, and setting up a pilot to see what would be involved in those types of transactions, and integration into a system and maybe the potential of making it larger sometime in the future. If you were going to establish that as a pilot, as the Hudson Renewable Energy Institute, how would you get started?
Well, if I understand you right, if you're a customer in the Mid-Hudson Valley and you want to buy only the blue electrons that are generated at a wind turbine up in the North Country, I can't guarantee that those blue electrons get to you because physics will get in the way.
No, I know.
If we thought there was enough appetite to create a market product such that people could offer a different price, specifically to guarantee that the amount of renewables were to match their consumption of renewables, I would think that wouldn't be a very complicated software project. I think it would be really just bringing it through our stakeholder process and see if there's an appetite, number one, for buyers, number two, for participants that would want to actively engage in that kind of a deal. And then, to some extent, the rest of the market participants would have to agree to allow us, New York ISO, to use our software resources to actually create that market. I mean, that's typically, and then the FERC would have to sign off on it.
And how would you start that process? I mean, would you first put it together as a potential design for market change? And if you did that, then how would you present it?
Well, our shared governance process is stakeholder driven. So we conduct the meetings and facilitate the meetings, but they're actually chaired by working groups and committees that are market participants. So the first course of action would be for somebody who was interested in a process like that to go to one of our lower level working groups, like the market issues working group, asked to be put on the agenda, make a presentation, try to get a sense in the room if there's an appetite to move it forward through the governance process, which would then turn into an elevation to one of the voting committees, which would then turn into a recommendation to our board, which would then get filed at the FERC, and the FERC would have to approve it. That's how a bill becomes a law in terms of our market rules. Anybody could initiate that process, but it's just a matter of, the way the governance process works is getting the right kind of support. Yes.
Yeah, just a quick follow-on comment to that. Actually, the company I work for, we had the largest purchase of renewable energy credits in the state of Connecticut, voluntary recs. So I think just, and there's a lot of other organizations, Fortune 500 and beyond, that are interested in that. So, I particularly like New York State apples, for example. Not necessarily all, for a lot of different reasons. Maybe taste, because they're local, they help local jobs, et cetera. And I think there is a growing appetite for people that are looking for some attributes And quite frankly, sometimes the voluntary rec markets and the RINI certification, other certification, gets a little bit fuzzy. It would be nice to offer that out to customers, I think, especially some of the customers that are already buying this in a different market.
That was good. I don't know if this will take it afield. I was actually going to ask this morning when that comment was made. I think substantially that opportunity exists now, either through green products offered by load serving entities, through net metering ability, and through simply calling a developer and asking for the development of a project. So I wasn't sure this morning if there was something I was missing or whatever, but I think substantially that opportunity
It
exists now.
exists now in aggregate as a merged product where you don't know what you're getting from whom. And essentially, you as a developer or even a consumer have no access to specific projects supplying you with energy at a specific level.
Well, not to steal the show, but I'd be happy to talk to you. There are opportunities for that. In some cases, I think, as was pointed out, there's no way to definitively say that this electron flowing.
Except by contract.
Exactly right. And by contract through means like that, I think that opportunity does exist.
I'm going to have to, we've got to move on to the next panelist, but I would suggest that there's some food for thought and some conversation that maybe can take place, at the break or following the conclusion of the discussion. We want to keep it on schedule. Thank you.